It's now time to start our next application. We're going to be working on an application called the Top 10 Apps Downloader. So what I want to do is explain what we're going to do, and then we'll get started into creating the project. So the first thing I'd like you to do is to go into Google and then actually do a search for Apple RSS feeds, like so. And then once you see the entry, which should be the first one in the list there, click on that. Now what this is a list of feeds that Apple make available. Now RSS feeds are a special type of format file, and I'm going to show you what they look like in a minute. But the idea of these files, these feeds, RSS feeds, is that they can be imported into applications and they can show some great information. In this case, you can see there's a variety of things that Apple actually create these RSS feeds for, such as the top 10 songs, top 25 songs, top 10 just added, but even things from an apps point of view as well as music, top 25 paid apps, top 10 free apps, etc. So the one we're going to work with is the top 10 free apps. And what this is, this file is updated automatically every time there's a change in the top 10. So in other words, you can use this file and it will be updated every time you access the URL, which I'm going to show you how to do this shortly. And that is updated every time there's a change. So it's a great way to be kept up to date with things as they change. So what our project is going to do is to actually read this file. It's going to decipher what the contents of that file are and then import them into our application, into our program we're going to create. And ultimately, we're going to go through that list, import it in, and actually show it on the screen. So that's really what we're trying to achieve today with our application. So a good way of figuring this stuff out and having a look at the RSS file is to actually open up a link. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open a new tab and I'm going to paste in this link. And this link is in the notes for the video, so you can have a look in the resources section. But codebeautify.org/XML viewer. Now this is just a free website you can actually paste in a URL for an RSS feed, or actually for an XML file. And I'll talk about the differences shortly. And it will show you it in a little bit easier to read format. I'm going to go back then to my Apple site that I had open. I'm going to right click the top 10 free apps. I'm going to click on copy link address. I'm going to go back to this code Beautify, and I'm going to click on load URL. And see down here, it's actually showing you or telling you to paste the URL in. So I'm going to paste that in, and you should have a URL that looks something like ax.itunes.apple and all these other numbers and letters at the end. But basically, that should be the one. Click on load. And what's happened is on the left-hand side, this is the contents of the XML file. XML and RSS feed is essentially the same thing. The XML file is it's a standard way to store or to actually store files or store the contents of particular data that can be read in by other programs. So in other words, if you create a file that is in a valid XML format, other programs that actually understand XML can actually load that. And Android actually provides functionality for us to actually manipulate XML files. So this file is actually an XML file, but it's also an RSS feed, which is really just a type of XML file. So you don't really need to understand this too much. You've got all these, the less than and the question mark XML and so forth. You don't really need to know a lot about that. Just think of it as a way to actually describe data and for it's really for computers to be able to manipulate that data, to load that data and to process it on the screen. So that's what it looks like on the left-hand side. So if you open that in your browser, in a normal browser tab, that's what you would see. But on the right-hand side, what this website does, it just really shows you a bit of an easier overview of what the data is. And the main points that I want you to look at the moment are the parts that I've highlighted in orange with an orange background, because they are the sort of major fields that are going to be, or that we are going to be using ultimately in our application. And these are the parts of the XML that actually equate. So for example, this part here, HTTP, that equates directly with this information that's in this less than sign, ID, greater than sign, and all the code that's within that. So again, you don't need to understand that. What this is doing is just showing you a better representation of the data that's in that XML file. Because again, the XML file is not really aimed at humans to read. It's more as a mechanism to transfer data so that computers can understand it. But you can see these fields that are listed with an orange background are really what we're talking about. These are the key elements of each particular entry that's in there. So for example, just scrolling down a little bit further, you can see we've got photo math, and it's got the title of the application, it's got a summary of what it is, It's got the name. It's got a link. A link is a link to the application in the iTunes Store, and it's got a content type, the category that it's actually in, all those types of things. Well, this is just an easy to understand format of what's in there. So again, our application, what it's going to do is going to actually retrieve this data that I actually have done manually here, import it into our program, and ultimately going to display that in a format that we can understand on the screen. So let's get started doing that now. So we're going to flip over to Android Studio, and you can see that I've started typing here. So what we're going to do is we're going to just create a standard application, which you've seen us do a few times now. I'm going to call this one Top 10 Downloader. Accept all the defaults there because they've been defined correctly. I'm going to do the same defaults that we've done for previous projects here. So phone and tablet is fine. Click on next. I'm going to choose blank activity again, as we've done previously. And all these defaults, I'm going to leave them without changing anything either. Okay, so you can see just loading up now into Android Studio. I'm going to close down the tip of the day. Just wait till it finishes off, and then we'll get started. What I'll do is I'll just put it into presentation mode, so we've got a full screen. See things a bit easier. Okay, so I'm just going to open my project window so we can see a little bit more. Actually, I'm going to need to wait till this finishes, so I'll just wait till it finishes loading. There we go. Okay, so again, what we're going to try and do ultimately, we're going to start off keeping things really basic. We're going to get it to download and print that file out and just print out the contents of the XML file before we try and make it look a little bit nicer on the screen. So we're really just going to do the basics, and then we're going to slowly expand and create an ever more complex application, going through the process a step at a time. So the first really key thing we want to do is we need a mechanism to be able to download the file. Ultimately, we need to download the file so that we can then process it and then obviously ultimately show it on the screen. Now, the thing to think about with Android applications, when you start doing things like downloading and other things of that nature, you need to be very conscious of what you're doing to your application, because of course the worst scenario might be that you start downloading and then the whole program freezes while it's downloading. So as far as the user is concerned, if they tap and nothing happens, they can't exit the application or they can't open another application. That would be a really bad experience. And in actual fact, Android has got a mechanism inbuilt. So if a program does what's called blocking, because that's what that is, that's actually blocking the user from being able to do anything, they will automatically delete your program after a certain period of time, or they'll shut it down, I should say, and it would need to be restarted. But clearly, even if Android didn't do that, that would be a really negative experience. So you wouldn't want the situation where you clicked a button to download and for the program to freeze. You'd want to show a progress bar. You'd want the option for them to click on cancel if they decided they didn't want to wait for the download. And you just really want some mechanism so that they can still use their phone or tablet while your program is running, while it's actually performing the action that in this case will be downloading. So this is a really important consideration, and Android certainly are aware of that, and they've introduced something called asynchronous coding. Now, what that means is that really, in a traditional sense, if you think back to the days of older computers, what tended to happen was you would actually run one application at a time, and it would take over the entire computer, and no other program would work until you exited out of that computer. That doesn't work in today's environments, particularly with phones, for example, because you couldn't block the whole interface and then stop phone calls coming in. So lots of things are happening in the background automatically. So we need this mechanism of what's called to be asynchronous. And in a nutshell, what that means is we send off a request to do something, in this case to download a file, but then we don't wait for the file to come back to us. So in other words, as soon as we've sent off the request, we say to the Android, basically the Android software development kit, go away and download or perform this task, but let me know when you're finished. Then in the meantime, your program can still work. In this case, it's going to be a simple program, so it probably won't have any other functionality. But assuming that you've got a program that perhaps had some other functionality, the user could still be doing other things in that application while it was waiting for a response. And certainly, as is the case with our program, we'll still be able to we could close down the program to minimize it. We could actually have something else running. In other words, the actual phone or tablet will still be responsive to the user. So that's what's called being asynchronous, is sending off the request to do something, but not waiting and stopping or blocking things from happening. Instead, Android, we set up a mechanism so that Android comes back and says, oh, I've now finished this task. What do you want me to do? Then we process that. So what Android have given us is a mechanism, and it's called an async task. So what we're going to do is we're going to start off creating a little mini class, and that class's purpose is to actually create, or download I should say, the file, XML file that we're going to use. So to do that, we need to go into our Java code, go into our main activity. I'm going to double click that. So I'm going to do something a little bit different here. I'm going to create a class, but I'm going to create a private class that's part of the main activity class. Now that sounds a little bit confusing, but as we go through the application, you'll understand why we're doing it. But the bottom line is, normally you click on the package, as you've seen me do a number of times, right click on new, click on Java class and create it that way. But that would create a new class sort of alongside main activity. But in that case, we can't actually do that there, because what we want to do is we want to create a class that's part of this main activity class, because we're linking the two together. What we're saying is the class we're creating has only to do with, its sole purpose is to work with and link with the main activity class. And ultimately we want to do that because we want to actually update what's on the screen, and that's controlled by this main activity class. So consequently, what we're going to do is we're going to go down here to the last part after the last method that's been already automatically set up for us. We're going to start typing in there, and we're going to start typing private class. We're going to call it download data. But we're going to type extends async task. You notice as I'm typing, IntelliJ is coming up and saying, do you mean this? So that's the one we want. So I'm going to press enter there. And then I'm going to type string void string. Now you might be looking at that thinking, what on earth has Tim done here? Well, what we're doing in a nutshell, by using the extends keyword, we're saying we want to take advantage of this asynchronous processing that I talked about that's built into Android. So we want our class to use that. And it actually takes 3 parameters. So there's 3 different parameters that are actually we need to define when we actually set up an async task so that Android knows what type of task we're dealing with. So the first one, this one here, the first parameter, that is ultimately going to be the download location where we're going to actually store, where our files are that are stored on the server somewhere on the internet, in this case on Apple servers, where they are. So that's the location of those files. So the second one is marked void, which we're not going to use. But what void is normally used is for a progress bar. So if you think of a case, well, let's just say you're downloading like 100 megabytes of data and it was going to take several minutes, you'd probably want to show a progress bar on the screen to show the user how much percent of the download was completed. In our case, because we're downloading such a small file, relatively small file, it's literally going to be finished in half a second or a second, depending on the speed of your internet location, or probably even faster than that. It doesn't make sense to pop up a progress bar because it would be complete and be instantly cancelled and done. So we're going to use void, and that special keyword void, what that tells Java is don't try and use a progress bar. So we want to just process it without a progress bar at all, because we know it's going to be quite quick. And the third parameter is the actual result. So what has actually happened, and the response that comes back from the process that we're setting up, what is the data type for that? And you'll see these in use as we progress anyway. But essentially, when you're setting up this async task, which again is part of Android, you need to specify those 3 types. And more often than not, you'll probably use string, void, and string as I've done here. And you'd only change void if you actually wanted to use a progress bar, which of course we're not going to use in our application. Okay, so what I'm going to do, we've got the basics done. Now we're actually getting an error there. And the error is coming up at saying that we need to actually, now that we've decided that we're going to use this async task, what Java is saying was, okay, well, if you want to use this task, you need to actually create certain methods. And there's one in there that's called do in background, as you can see actually coming up saying it must be declared abstract or implement. So in other words, what it's saying is you need to implement this do in background method. And by doing that, that's then taking advantage of the async task. So we're going to leave the video here for now, but in the next video, we're going to start using the async task. And the first thing we'll do is we'll implement this do in background method and get rid of that the red arrow showing on the screen. So I'll see you in that next video.